In 1996, one of the wealthiest men in America shot an Olympic champion in his own driveway, in broad daylight, with witnesses. No mask, no attempt to run. He just pulled up, rolled down the window, and fired. The heir to a $30 billion empire. The loneliest man I've ever told a story about. But this story didn't start here. 1800. A French immigrant steps onto the shore of the young American Republic. His name is Eleuthère Irénée Dupont. Almost no money, no connections, broken English. But he has something better. He knows how to make gunpowder. Not just any gunpowder, the best on the continent. He studied under Lavoisier himself, the father of modern chemistry. And that knowledge is literally worth more than gold. Especially in a country that just won a revolution and is already getting ready for the next war. In 1802, he builds his first mill on the Brandywine River in Delaware. A handful of workers, one mill wheel, wooden storage sheds along the water. Nobody really believes it'll amount to much. And then America starts going to war. The War of 1812. The army needs powder. They go to the DuPonts. The Mexican-American War, back to the DuPonts. The Civil War, the bloodiest in the country's history, and both sides are buying powder from the same family. Then the Spanish-American War. Then World War I, where DuPont supplies 40% of all the explosives used by the Allies. 40% of a world war. One family. That's cynical. But that's exactly how the biggest fortunes in history get built. Not despite chaos, but inside it. While some people lose, others supply. By the early 20th century, DuPont controls more than a third of the entire American explosives market. And they're already looking beyond gunpowder. Gunpowder is a wartime contract. They were already thinking about what comes after. And they were right, because after powder came chemistry. After chemistry came synthetics. After synthetics came the atomic project. Every time history turned a corner, the family turned with it. A rare skill. Too bad it only applied to business. In the 1910s, the company starts pouring money into synthetic materials, hiring top scientists, building labs, spending on experiments with unpredictable outcomes. And in 1938, they hit. DuPont releases nylon. One material rewrites the entire global textile industry. Nylon stockings hit the shelves, and in the first year alone, 64 million pairs sell. Women line up around the block. The papers call it nylon fever. Then Teflon. Then Kevlar. Then Lycra. And here's the part that almost nobody talks about. 1943. The American government launches a secret project. So secret that most of the people working on it have no idea what they're actually building. The Manhattan Project. The atomic bomb. The government needs a contractor. Reliable. With experience handling dangerous materials. They go to the DuPonts. DuPont builds the Hanford site in Washington state. That's where the plutonium for the bomb dropped on Nagasaki is produced. For this work, the family charges $1. For patriotic reasons, that's what they said. Or maybe they just understood that being the contractor for the atomic bomb program was worth more than any check. After the war, DuPont isn't just a wealthy family anymore. It's part of American history, an institution. The family lives in estates that genuinely rival European palaces. The main residence, Nemours, 77 rooms. Gardens copied from Versailles, a pool with marble columns, old masters on the walls, 77 rooms, gardens across acres, marble everywhere you look. You walk in and you understand immediately. This isn't about comfort. It's about making sure everyone around you knows their place. And here's the first thing you need to understand about the DuPonts. They weren't just accumulating wealth. They were building a wall between themselves and the rest of the world. At first, it looked like protection. They just didn't know it yet. To keep money inside the family, the DuPonts married inside the family, cousins marrying cousins, distant relatives marrying slightly less distant ones. In 19th century Europe, this was normal. The British royal family did the same thing, the Romanovs, the Habsburgs. But time passed, and by the 20th century, this started producing results nobody had planned for. Several family members suffered from serious mental illness. This isn't rumor. It's court records, medical documents, biographies written with access to family files. Depression, paranoia, a complete inability to form normal relationships outside the family circle. But you know what works really well when you need to hide a problem? Money. Hire the right doctors. They stay quiet. Hire the right lawyers. They keep it out of the papers. Close the right doors, and the family keeps looking flawless in the society pages. So decade after decade, something was building inside that gleaming shell, quietly, invisible from outside. John DuPont wasn't the first person this system broke. He just had enough money that when it finally broke him, the whole world got to watch. Take his great-uncle, William DuPont Sr., one of the wealthiest men in America, horse breeder, owner of multiple estates. By the end of his life, he barely left the house, surrounded himself with servants who weren't allowed to disagree with him, died completely alone, surrounded by horses, the only creatures he trusted. Sound familiar? Or take Alfred DuPont, one of the company's directors in the early 20th century. He went deaf in one ear after an explosion at a factory, and instead of seeing a doctor, he started building a literal wall around himself, bought a piece of land and enclosed it with a 10-foot fence topped with barbed wire. Said he wanted peace and quiet. The neighbors said something different. These aren't coincidences, it's a pattern. And here's what matters. All these men, Alfred with his fence, William with horses instead of friends, John with his armored truck, they weren't villains. They were lonely. They just each had enough money to turn their loneliness into architecture. A fence, an estate, a security perimeter. Money doesn't create loneliness, but it lets you build walls around it so high that nobody can reach you anymore. John Eleuther DuPont was one of the people this shell hid the longest. He was born in 1938 into a family that by then had several generations of people who knew how to make money and knew how to do almost nothing else. His father died when John was 14. His mother was left alone with 4 children and an enormous fortune. By all accounts, she handled the money well. The children, less so. John was the youngest, quiet, a little strange from childhood, but in a family where strange was normal, nobody paid much attention. His father, William DuPont Jr., one of the wealthiest men in America. Horses, estates, society events. His mother, Jean Austen DuPont, cold, closed off. By all accounts from people who knew the family, she wasn't very present as a mother. Not absent, exactly, just somewhere very far away, even when she was sitting right next to you. The children had nannies and tutors. Their mother showed up for lunch and official events. There was plenty of money in that house. Everything else was in short supply. There's one episode several biographers mention. Jean DuPont once took young John to the stables. She pointed to a horse, beautiful, thoroughbred, and said, "This is your real friend. Horses don't betray you." The boy was about 8 years old. John grew up on Foxcatcher Farm, 800 acres outside Philadelphia. Stables, ponds, woods. A property so large you could go weeks without crossing its borders. He didn't. He got into birds. Seriously, not as a hobby. He wrote several ornithology books that were taken seriously in academic circles. Then sports. Modern pentathlon, swimming, wrestling. He trained hard, not because Dad bought him a medal, but because he actually put in the work. And you know what? It worked. For real. In 1976, he competed at the Montreal Olympics as part of the U.S. pentathlon team. Didn't win, but finished. For a man who had trained in isolation on a private farm with no professional coaching staff, that was something. Almost nobody writes about this, which is a shame, because it shows John could. He was capable of earning something real, something that comes from sweat, not a checkbook. It just was never enough, and never would be, because the family name walked into every room ahead of him. In every conversation, people smiled, shook his hand, said the right things, and thought about money. Always money. He felt it, and he had no idea what to do with that. Hey, really quickly, before we go on, this isn't an ad. It's just a request. If you're enjoying this video, hit the like button, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please do, so you don't lose the channel. It matters to us. It helps us make more videos. Thanks. Now let's keep going. At some point, he found wrestling, freestyle wrestling, and it became the first place he ever felt like a person, not a last name. In 1987, he built a wrestling facility on the grounds of Foxcatcher Farm. A serious one. World-class gym, equipment, full infrastructure. And he started calling in the best athletes in the country, with money, housing, everything covered. On paper, he was the owner, the patron, the sponsor. But John didn't want to be the owner. He wanted to belong. To be the guy people called not because he was paying, but because they actually wanted him around, because he was needed. That's not something you can buy. He didn't know any other way to get it. The Schultz brothers, Dave and Mark, both Olympic wrestling champions, took him up on it, moved on to the farm with their families. Dave Schultz deserves his own story. Warm, alive. One of those people who makes the room feel better just by being in it. He came from a completely different world. No estates, no servants, no famous name. His father was a regular working man. Dave got into wrestling on his own, from nothing, through years of grinding. In 1984, he won Olympic gold in Los Angeles, then 2 more world championships. He didn't come for the money. He came because he believed in the project, in the sport, and a little in John himself. Dave was the kind of person who doesn't walk out on people. That's what got him killed. The first year or two, everything was fine. Training, competitions, results. John was around, content, almost happy. For the first time in his life, he had something that felt like a team. He'd train alongside the athletes, step onto the mat. They didn't kick him out. He was paying, but they didn't really include him either. He was just the owner who wanted to play. John felt it and started pushing harder. He wanted to be listed as head coach in official documents. Then he wanted to stand in the corner during competitions. Then he wanted his biography to say he'd shaped a generation of champions. The athletes looked at each other. The coaches said nothing. The money was good. For a while, everything looked fine, even good. And then, something started that the athletes would talk about in hushed voices for years. Early 90s. John starts to change. At first, small things. Strange comments. A look that lingered just a little too long. Questions that made no sense in context. Then worse. He said people were watching him, that there were hidden cameras in the walls of the house, that enemies were trying to get onto the farm. He called them different things. Competitors, agents, Russians. Russian agents on a private farm in Pennsylvania. One athlete remembered this. John walks into the gym during a training session, doesn't say anything, looks at the walls, then says he can feel the presence of the devil in the room, and walks out. Everyone freezes. Nobody knows what to do. An hour later, he comes back like nothing happened and offers to take everyone out to dinner. Another time, He calls one of the wrestlers into his office, stares at him in silence for several minutes, then asks, "Are you working for me or against me?" The wrestler says, "For you, of course." John nods and lets him go. The next day, completely normal. Then something else started. John stopped sleeping at night. The security team said he'd wander the estate at 3 a.m. with a flashlight, checking the fences, staring into the dark. Sometimes he'd stop and just stand there for a long time, not moving, just looking. During training, he started keeping notes. Who talked to whom? Who looked where? Who stayed late after practice? Then he'd call people in and ask, "Why were you talking to him? About what? Why?" One of the coaches said in an interview later, "We all knew something was wrong, but what are you supposed to do? It's his farm, his money, his rules." At some point, John started calling himself the Golden Eagle. He wanted everyone else to call him that too. At competitions, he'd walk to the mat in a tracksuit with an American flag on it, like he was the one competing. He dictated a biography to journalists in which he was the coach who had shaped an entire generation of champions. The athletes kept their mouths shut. The journalists wrote what they were told. The money was good. His mother died in 1988. The same woman who had led him to the stables and told him, "Horses don't betray you." People who were around at the time said John changed sharply after her death, like the last thread connecting him to reality had snapped. He started drinking, first in the evenings, then in the mornings. Security guards said he'd call them at 4 a.m, demanding they come immediately. Said he could hear sounds behind the fence, that someone was digging under the wall. They'd arrive, nothing. He'd look at them with suspicion and send them home. Several people tried to convince him to see a doctor. His lawyers, the estate manager, one of the coaches. Every time, no, he wasn't sick. Everyone around him was plotting something. Money did its work. Nobody could make him do anything. Nobody had the right. He was the owner. He was a DuPont. Athletes started leaving, one by one, quietly, no drama. Dave stayed. He had a family. His wife Nancy, 2 kids, a house right there on the farm. And he believed the situation would sort itself out, that John needed help, that walking out right now meant abandoning someone. Nancy later said in an interview, "Why didn't he leave when everyone else already had?" She answered quietly, "He believed in people, even when he shouldn't have." Dave talked to John directly several times, tried to explain, "You need help, doctors, actual sleep, talk to someone." John would listen, nod, and keep walking the farm at night with his flashlight. Nancy asked her husband to leave. He said, "Just a little longer. Wait, it'll get better." It didn't. There was one more conversation, not long before January 1996. Dave came to John again. They sat in his office. Dave said, "John, I can see you're not okay. Let's find a doctor, a good one. I'll help." John looked at him for a long time, then said, "You're the only one who tells me the truth." "I know." A few weeks later, he shot him. January 26, 1996. Around 3 in the afternoon, John gets into his armored SUV, a security guard beside him. They drive toward the Schultz house. Dave is in the driveway, looking under the hood of his car. Ordinary day. Nancy is inside. The kids are somewhere nearby. Nothing feels off. The SUV stops. Dave turns around. DuPont rolls down the window. 2 shots. Dave Schultz, 2-time world champion, 1984 Olympic gold medalist, falls beside his car. He's 36 years old. Nancy runs outside, sees her husband on the ground, sees the SUV pulling away. The security guard later told investigators, "I didn't have time to understand what was happening. It was over in a few seconds." The SUV drives back to the main house. For 18 hours, John doesn't come out. Police surround the perimeter. Negotiators talk to him by phone. Sometimes he answers coherently, sometimes not. He demands to speak with representatives of foreign governments. He calls himself the Dalai Lama. Eventually, the police make a simple call. January, below freezing. Cut the heat. A few hours later, John walks out on his own. The trial runs 2 years. Defense, not guilty by reason of insanity. Prosecution, premeditated. Verdict, guilty of third-degree murder, mentally ill. John DuPont dies in prison in December 2010, 72 years old, 14 years behind bars. Nobody talks much about Nancy Schultz. That's a mistake. Picture this. You're living on someone else's property. Your husband works for a man who is clearly unwell. Everyone around you can see it. Your husband stays, because that's who he is. And one January afternoon, you look out the window and see an SUV pulling up to the house. Nancy saw everything. She was home. While the criminal trial was going on, she filed a civil lawsuit. DuPont's lawyers stalled, contested, kept redirecting attention to their client's psychiatric condition. Nancy didn't back down. She received a settlement, reportedly around $35 million. DuPont money, which doesn't bring her husband back, which doesn't explain to the kids why dad didn't come home. But she did something else too. She founded the Dave Schultz Wrestling Club, continued what he'd started, only this time without armored vehicles and paranoid sponsors. Just the sport, just the memory. That's the only bright detail in this whole story. This isn't just a story about a billionaire who lost his mind. John DuPont didn't break in a single moment. No one event took him down. He was shaped by a system, one his family had been building and refining for generations. He didn't break. He was made this way. Nobody just wanted to see it. When money becomes the answer to everything, it quietly displaces everything else. Warmth, closeness, the feeling that you're worth something on your own, without the name, without the account. Look at the people around John throughout his entire life. Servants, on payroll. Security guards, on payroll. Coaches, on payroll. Athletes, on payroll. Lawyers, doctors, estate managers, everyone employed. Nobody just there. Was there a single person in his life who came to him without wanting money? Who would have stayed if the money ran out? Dave Schultz, probably. He stayed, not because of the pay, but because he believed. And John shot him. The DuPonts built one of the most powerful industrial empires in American history. Nylon, Kevlar, Teflon, that's them. Their inventions are in your jacket right now, on your frying pan, in a bulletproof vest somewhere on the other side of the planet. They funded the Manhattan Project. For a century and a half, they were part of the backbone of the American economy. And through all of that, behind the closed doors of the estates, something was accumulating that money can't buy. Attention, real closeness. An answer to a simple question. Who am I if you take the name away? John looked for that answer his whole life. In birds, in sports, in a wrestling gym where he wanted to be one of the guys. He never found it. There's a pattern people talk about with big family fortunes. The first generation builds, the second maintains, the third starts losing the thread. The DuPonts went through this cycle several times. They were smart enough to keep reinventing the business, through chemistry, through materials, through diversification. But people, they never figured out how to reinvent. And each generation got a little more money, and a little less sense of why. Worth noting, after John died in 2010, it came out that he'd left a significant portion of his estate not to family members. The money went to conservation projects, ornithology funds, wrestling programs, people he shared no blood with, just some common interests. That says a lot about how he lived and what he was missing. Today, Nemours is a museum. Tourists walk through 77 rooms, photograph the furniture, admire the gardens. No DuPonts live there anymore. Foxcatcher Farm has been partially turned over as a nature preserve. The wrestling facility is gone. All that's left of the estate are some old stables and the road that leads to the place where the house used to stand. DuPont the company still exists. It merged with Dow Chemical and became one of the largest chemical conglomerates in the world. Thousands of employees, billions in revenue. The family hasn't run it directly for a long time. Of the family that once owned an entire state, very little remains. A few names on museum plaques, a few estates open to tourists, and this story about a man who had everything, and for whom it wasn't enough. One question stays with me after this story. Not about the murder. That part makes sense once you've seen everything leading up to it. Something else. How does a man who has literally everything manage to feel that empty? Probably because everything and enough are not the same thing. They never were. There's something about looking at photos of John DuPont. There aren't many. He didn't like being photographed. But in the ones that exist, he always has the same expression. He's looking slightly off to the side of the camera, not smiling, like he's present, but somewhere else. In family photos, same thing. Everyone looks at the lens. John looks past it. Maybe he just never knew where to look his whole life. The DuPonts built their shell for 200 years. Beautiful, solid, impenetrable from the outside. Estates with Versailles gardens, factories that fed armies, portraits in gilded frames, generation after generation, more and more formal, further and further from living people. But a shell isn't a home. Inside one, you can be completely alone. And when it cracked with a gunshot in someone else's driveway on a January afternoon. Dave Schultz didn't have to die. He just stayed when everyone else left, believed, paid with his life. John DuPont could have lived differently, maybe, if someone had seen what was happening in time, if the system his family built hadn't been designed to hide things rather than fix them. But that didn't happen. In 2014, the film Foxcatcher came out, with Channing Tatum and Steve Carell. Carell plays John DuPont in heavy prosthetic makeup, almost unrecognizable. The film was nominated for an Oscar. A lot of people watched it and thought, well, that's Hollywood. Artistic license. Things like that don't really happen. They do. Everything shown in that film happened. Even the strangest scenes are documented. Foxcatcher Farm is up for sale. They're planning to build a residential development there. Regular houses, regular families, kids who will run across those fields not knowing what happened here. That's probably right. The land isn't to blame. Land is just land. Sooner or later, what you build for protection starts cracking from the inside. For the DuPonts, it took 200 years, and it ended with a gunshot.